Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston and I'm back today after some time off on a lovely holiday in Portugal. My colleagues have just been joking that my skin is the colour of my door beside it, so they obviously think I've got a cracking tan going on after spending some time on the beach and by the pool. But first of all, how are you, Samuel? Obviously I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst and Tyrone Marshall. How are you, Samuel?
I'm very well, thank you. It's good to have you back, Stephen.
I'm absolutely delighted to be back alongside Tyrone as well. Tyrone, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Stephen. Good. I've enjoyed hearing all about the culture you enjoyed on your holiday.
Well, you're going to the same location, Tyrone. We're just seeing him in 3 weeks.
A very different holiday, it'd be fair to say.
I'm a family man as well, Tyrone. I don't know what you're on about. I've got 2 kids and a wife, and I've had a lovely time away.
You have now, anyway, after the holiday.
You can't out us like that. Anyways, plenty to get into across the next 45 minutes. We've got Leeds friendly chat. Obviously, United won 2-0 away in Oslo. Our colleague Rich Fay made the trip across there. United got fantastic support across in Norway. We've got some transfer chat as well, because United are making progress in a deal for Andre Onana from Inter Milan, who's looking likely to be the second signing of the summer after Mason Mount. But we'll start with the friendly chat. Samuel, that was obviously on Wednesday afternoon, a 2-0 win in the end. Ten Hag picked a very strong team, I'd say, a relatively strong team to begin with. A lot of senior first-team players in there with a bit of youth. And then half-time, he made wholesale changes, didn't he? 11 players got replaced. The youngsters came out and they did really well, held their own and they won 2-0 in the end with goals from Emeran and Hugo. So what was your reaction from the game? Your main takeaways? Who impressed you most? Because there's a few names we'll touch upon. Because for me, Kobbie Mainoo was brilliant and Hannibal, but I'm sure we'll come on to them in a bit more detail.
Yeah, it's typical of Rich, isn't it? That he goes to the game, but he gets the day off, so where we're podcasting about it, so we can't glean any insight from him, unfortunately. But from my sofa anyway, because I sat this one out. United were reasonably good in the first half with the senior side, if you like. I mean, it was I think Leeds did it the other way around, didn't they? It was a much more senior Leeds team in the second half. It was an unrecognisable Leeds team in the first half, maybe because they thought that would give them a better chance of victory. But I suppose the not the main talking points, but the fact that Fred travelled and then he wasn't in the squad whatsoever, and it was managing his workload, and you think, well, he's not played in nearly 6 weeks. He's not been on international duty. He's been on holiday for 4 or 5 weeks. What workload is to manage there? Everybody knows that he's effectively up for sale as well. But for those who did play, I thought Mainoo was very polished again. It took him 10 seconds to have an impact with a ball through to Ahmad that was hazardous enough for the Leeds guy to trip him. He played another good pass that accelerated an attack. I thought him and Mount worked quite well in tandem. We always have to caveat these things that with the sedate pace, with the fact that it's a friendly, and as I said, it was an unrecognisable Leeds team. But Mainoo, Mount and Mejbri, the 3 M's were the ones who certainly stood out. I think with Mejbri, it was good to see. It was good to see him back playing for United and getting a start for United, because I don't think that happened under Ten Hag during pre-season last year, which was something of a surprise, because you could see him having potentially having a role on pre-season, especially since it was Ten Hag's first few weeks. But clearly he didn't think he was ready, and he put him out on loan to Birmingham. But he didn't have much of a choice but to play him, given the lack of senior options with the international still away. And with Mejbri generating interest, Rich has written that Dortmund like the look of him. He gave a performance in 3/4 of an hour that suggested that he wasn't resigned to leaving United. He was aggressive. He got a ludicrous booking. I don't know what the referee was thinking, cautioning him when he just had it wasn't a particularly cynical tug back either on the Leeds player, and it was midway inside the Leeds half. It wasn't even in the United half, but he should have scored. He created a good chance. He pressed well. His pressing is one of his biggest assets, but whether he gets the opportunity to showcase that when the competitive action starts remains to be seen. But it was a bustling performance from him, and that's what he does in games when he gets a chance. He bustles about. He probably still needs to have more of a controlled aggression if he's to make that transition, that permanent transition into the United first team squad. But when I watch him, I think I'd rather, if I'm a United fan, just a United fan, rather than someone who follows them in press boxes, then I'd rather see him playing for United than Van der Beek, who was absent, than Marshall, who was absent. Two players whose cards need to be marked, and you could name other players as well. But given the uncertainty over his future, it's good to see that there's no sign of a lack of commitment from him. He was certainly committed, and with Mainu, I think that they certainly have to consider him as the fifth midfielder for the forthcoming season. He leapfrogged Iqbal last season in the pecking order. United had a bit more competition there after Sabitzer came in, and unfortunately for Mainu, he got injured for the run-in. But he's filled out over the last year. I thought he was terrific in the Youth Cup winning team. He's only had 87 minutes in the first team in competitive games. They've been against League One Charlton, Reading, who were relegated last season, and Leicester, who were also relegated, of course. So I think it's in everyone's interest that he's certainly on the plane to the States next week, because United are coming up against some exceptional midfielders. Declan Rice might be at Arsenal by then. Look at Real Madrid's midfield department. You've got the great and the great to be's, if you like, with Camavinga, Tchouaméni and Bellingham, and Modric and Kroos are still there. Dortmund, okay, the names don't exactly roll off the tongue there, but they are a team that should have won the Bundesliga last season, so they need to pit him against midfields of that calibre. And as misleading as pre-season can be, it can also be a pretty good litmus test of a player. We saw that with Mason Greenwood 4 years ago when he went on tour to Singapore and Australia and China, and he did very well. And in his first full season, he was excellent under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. So the way it's going with Mainu, I would certainly advise against learning him to a football league club next season, because I think there's potential there for him to have a decent role as a squad member where he's learning the ropes. And you see the way it's panning out in midfield. Eriksen and Casemiro are 31. McTominay, anything could happen there with him. Fred, I think he eventually probably will go this summer. There's every chance that Mainu will be playing a lot more regularly for United in midfield sooner rather than later.
I really hope he takes the Garnacho route now. He's kept around the first team, he blends in with the experienced heads, kept around training, because he's really, his ceiling's really high, he's got clear potential, he's really a talented young lad. And I think everyone you talk to as well, whether it be coaches or people at the club, they paint a picture of him being so, keeps his head down, he's polite, he's likable.
He's grounded, isn't he?
He's really got his head screwed on his shoulders. And let's just remind ourselves, he's 18, he only just turned 18 in April. And much was made, obviously, about Zidane Iqbal leaving the club, but he was 20 years old, 2 years above Mainu, and he leapfrogged him last season, didn't he? So it kind of explains why that happened. Tyrone, we've not even discussed Mason Mount yet. 55 million signing. He obviously made his uncompetitive debut. He played as a number 8, which I think is the position he's probably been brought to the club to play in, that kind of deeper role. So what did you make of that? Because he obviously made his name as a number 10, didn't he? He's an attacking midfielder, but he seems really to have the qualities to excel in that position. I thought his pressing was fantastic. There was a moment in the first half, where obviously came off at half time, where he won the ball quite high up the field and he was leading the press and he just dinked it over the bar. He came very close, but it was a promising 45 minutes, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And I think it's going to help him having that settled position. We've seen him move about, really. Like I say, he's played as a 10. He's played on the left, I think, for England. He's moved about for Chelsea. He's very positionally versatile, but I think it will help him starting every week, playing in the same position. And for me, his best position is as a number 8. He's got a really good all-round midfield game. He can contribute defensively. We've spoken before about how every manager he plays under loves him because of his intelligence to just pick the right moment, to know what to do on intuition, really. The pressing is a huge one, I think. He was as good off the ball as he was on it, and that's going to be huge for United next year. They pressed more under Ten Hag last season, but I don't think they ever pressed to the extent that we thought they would do. And part of that is maybe that we just felt they didn't have the legs to do it. We spoke quite a bit towards the end of the season about how that is an ageing midfield, also the 2 31-year-olds. Fernandes got better with his pressing. He can be a little bit headless chicken, I think, at times with his pressing. He's almost so desperate to win the ball back that he overcommits, especially when things haven't been going well for him. I think he's improved on that. And I think it will help having Mount alongside him. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that 4-3-3 midfield where you've got basically one sitting and two number 8s, the way City do it, with Mount and Fernandes there. I think he'll bring an awful lot to United with that pressing. It was interesting to hear Ten Hag talk about him and talk about how he brings a bit of dynamism to that midfield and he's more dynamic. And Ten Hag mentioned this analysis he always does of his team and said the analysis of last season was that they were lacking in that in midfield. And I think it was pretty clear that for all the quality of Casemiro and Eriksen on the ball, they, neither has got the legs to really influence games in terms of pressing. They're two nice midfielders. Casemiro can do the dirty work at times, but they're not as dynamic as they once were. So I think it was clear that midfield needed younger legs. And I think there's a lot to like about Mason Mount. I think it's going to be exciting to see him in that 4-3-3 as a number 8 alongside Fernandes, really. And I think we will see a lot more pressing from United next season and a lot more structure to that pressing. And I think Mount is going to be huge with that.
I mean, sticking with personalities, I don't know if you guys noticed this in the kind of the unveiling content and stuff that the club released. I thought Mount came across so well. A really likeable lad. I mean, he's 24 years old. He's obviously had great success with Chelsea, but he doesn't seem to have let that go to his head. He's won the Champions League. But obviously Ten Hag is really keen on bringing these good personalities in the dressing room. Good eggs, should we say, and he seems to be another one anyways. Samuel, from those youngsters that started the game, we discussed Hannibal and Kobbie Mainoo, but obviously Ahmed, Amori Forson and Alvaro Fernandez with a Z, not Bruno Fernandes with an S at the end, all started as well. So there's 5 youngsters from the start of the game. Would we say, with the exception of Forson, those 4 players will go across to America on the tour in a week and a half's time when you guys are there? Who are you expecting to head across to the States?
I think with Fernandes, that could be touch and go because they'll have 2 left backs back by that point. I suppose the reassuring thing for him and from Ten Hag, for United supporters, looking at the way Ten Hag was going about it, was that he started him ahead of Brandon Williams. It would have been pretty galling for the player if he was starting that game on the bench. Williams made 1 substitute appearance all of last season, I think it was,
and 5 Instagram stories.
This is the sad situation really with him. He had a very good first season, but to be relevant now, he has to go on social media and talk about Manchester City win the Champions League. Fernandes did very well on loan at Preston last season, so I think it's safe to say that Brandon Williams is 4th choice left back at United, and if they can sell him this summer, they will do. I don't think he'll be at the club this time next year. At the very latest, he's out of contract in 2024, and I can't see that extension being triggered. Fernandes did okay. He was quite quiet. He probably didn't help him that Forson was his partner on the left. Forson looked a little bit phased by it. He wasn't quite in sync. It's forgivable. It was a big moment for him, and all of a sudden he was playing with players that he doesn't usually play with, that he's never played with, and probably has barely trained with as well. So with who are the other youngsters? Remind me. Ahmed, I suppose, Ahmed is a youngster. He's been on everyone's mind for like nearly 3 years now. It's that whole thing. Is he still a young player? But he definitely is. He was bright. He was involved. He had a couple of decent opportunities that maybe if he was wearing a Sunderland shirt, he would have taken them. And that is where, as misleading as pre-season can be, it can still be a decent litmus test, and that you put someone in a Man United shirt in front of a reasonably big crowd, or certainly with a little bit more pressure on their shoulders, it can change them, and they can try too hard, or they can not play as naturally. And there were times where Ahmad, he had the ball under control, and then he lost control, and you could see the agony on his face. It almost looked like he was diving, but he wasn't. He just lost his balance and he'd lost the ball, and he knows how much, how big these moments are for him at the moment. If he impresses, he's absolutely staying in the squad next season. If he doesn't, you can't be as certain that he's going to be staying in the squad. But the fact that he was involved, that he wants to get on the ball, that he was playing on the right as well, because I think that would have been an element of doubt going into the game, where Marshall is made of papier-mâché. I think we all sensed that he probably wasn't going to start, and of course he didn't. that Ahmad could have played at the tip of the arrow, because that's where he did play in pre-season last year, when you knew if he's playing there's no chance of him staying in the squad, and it was the right thing for him to go out on loan as well. But he did all right, and there are going to be plenty more opportunities to come for him to improve on a reasonable performance level against Leeds. You'd think maybe it's something of an advantage in that he will play more games than most others, because the international players are coming back on Saturday. Ten Hag indicated they would not be involved at Murrayfield for the Lyon game. Then there are 3 games in the States for the first team, and then there are 2 more at Old Trafford against Lens and the Dublin game against Athletic Bilbao, where it will be 2 different teams. But it looks like Ahmad will get to play in 6 pre-season games, possibly half or the majority of them as a starter. So that stands him in good stead. Going back to Marshall, I think the question really that United should address there, and Ten Hag might get asked about it in America, is why was Marshall not at Carrington when he's recovering from an injury, when all the other players who are recovering from injury were at Carrington a week before, or the days before pre-season officially began? Van der Beek, Martinez, Anthony, Mainu, Henderson, they were all reporting at Carrington because they were coming from injury. Marshall, as his Instagram stories indicated, was not in the country when those players were at Carrington. And that's just another nail in his coffin. I mean, there's barely any room left in the coffin to hammer any more nails in, but you can't count on him anyway. But it gets to the point now where you even wonder, is there any point even taking him to the States if he's in any remote fit state, even just for rehabilitation, which has happened before on tours. Players have gone on them to continue their rehab. But again, another player out of contract next year who really United can't have him here this time next season.
Could you imagine the outcry of opening game of the season at Old Trafford? Wolves are visiting, and Anthony Martial is starting up front. It'd be a pretty miserable prospect, isn't it?
Sorry, United have just sent out a statement saying that UEFA have fined them for breaking financial fair play rules.
€300,000 fine.
So yeah, that's another statement. I received a pretty innocuous statement on Mason Mount dodging professional autograph hunters. I can just read you out both statements here, can't I? It's
breaking news as it happens.
Club sent from United says, well disappointed by the outcome, Manchester United accepts this fine for what UEFA acknowledges to be a minor technical breach of its previous financial fair play rules. This reflected a change in the way that UEFA adjusted for COVID-19 losses during the 2022 reporting period, which allowed us to recognise only €50 million of the €281 million of revenues lost due to the pandemic within the FP calculation. Post-pandemic, the club's revenues have recovered strongly and are forecast to reach a record level in the current financial year. The club continues to support the enforcement of rules to promote financial fair play and sustainability across domestic and European football. There's a little bit more to that as well. From United's point of view, they feel an element of disappointment at the lack of flexibility shown by UEFA in their treatment of a unique set of circumstances, but ultimately accept that they did make a technical breach. I mean, I think for people listening to this, it can't be particularly engaging, but I suppose it shows you how things have changed yesteryear. It was the only Manchester club that were ever going to be in breach of FFP with City, but the goalposts have shifted now with the rules redrafted. The Premier League's sustainability and profitability rules have come into it, and you've got United, mentioning FFP. It feels like whenever I have a conversation with anyone at the club about transfers, because they have to be mindful of that, where they've had such a poor history in the sellers market. They have to be a lot more careful in terms of how much they spend on incomings, whilst historically anyway they've not brought a lot of money in for outgoings.
Ty, have you got anything to add to that? I know you did a decent piece on financial fair play. Was it earlier in the week? I don't know if you want to add anything before we go to the next part.
Possibly. All the weeks blend into one at this time of year. But yeah, I mean, we've heard, like Samuel said, the club seem to mention it constantly, that they're sailing close to the wind by FFP, and they have said again today that the new FFP rules. Should we say that this fine is for historical issues? I think it's 2019 to 2022 maybe. And it's basically not breaking even. That COVID's affected a lot by that. So this is an historical issue rather than the current FFP concerns that they're talking about in the transfer window. And UEFA have actually changed the FFP rules. So this is the last time these rules will ever be in act, basically. So United have failed on these rules, but it's the new rules that they're concerned about in terms of the transfer window and spending. And they're part of those rules are this 70%. Well, it's going to 70%. I think it's 90, 80, then 70% by 2025 of 70% of revenue on transfers and wages and things like that, which United seem pretty well set for. I mean, the last accounts, they had 50% wages to turnover. And that was down from 67%, basically because Ronaldo had left. So it was, they were in a good position by that. It's not clear how these rules really affect them. I mean, the people I've spoken to are unclear why United would be particularly worried about FFP, but they're not alone on that going forward. And they have said again today that, the constraints, the new UEFA rules are a constraint on what they and what other clubs can do in the transfer window, basically. And we know United have mentioned it a lot. We believe this budget's around 120 million pound, net spend this summer. So they've got to sell players. Part of it is maybe, a message to other clubs that we've got FFP issues. We can't pay 60 million for Onana and 100 million euros for Rasmus Holjund, but there's clearly some concern there about these FFP rules.
Nicely done, Ty. And I'll just say, obviously, we're recording this on a early Friday afternoon. So by the time this podcast is out, head across to the site. We'll have some reaction to that breaking story on the MEN site and across social media. We'll leave that there for part one. We've mumbled on a bit and I'm going to get told off by the producer. So we'll be back in a moment for part two. So, Tyrone, I was going to start part two because part one rumbled on. I was going to ask you about Ahmad, right? I wanted you to finish that up because I remember a couple of months ago, we discussed his loan at Sunderland. He was fantastic. He ended the season with 14 goals and 4 assists. He produced some really big goals and big moments, that left foot. There was a free kick goal, wasn't there, I think, in the playoffs, which was fantastic. And he looked really exciting. But I think I said, do you know what? I think another loan would be best for him. And you argued that perhaps he'd be best to be kept around the first team because there's not much competition for Anthony. So do you think that's the role he'll be used in next season? Do you think Ten Hag's looking at him now, or you look across him in the next 5-6 weeks on pre-season and make that decision? Because he is obviously a right-sided forward, and there's actually a lack of those players at the club. They all tend to play on the left, don't they?
Yeah, they do. He's got a natural role there. There isn't another left-footed right-sided forward that could fill in for Anthony. So there is a gap there in the squad for him. Samuel did the story last week that if they sign Holjund, United still want another forward, and Ten Hag wants someone who can play across the line, really. I mean, that could be Ahmad. He did play, I think he played 9 games as a striker for Sunderland last year, so he's more of a false 9. He's obviously not going to win you many headers at 5'8" in the Premier League, but he has played that role. He can do it, but he's got to earn it. And as much as it's in the matches, it's also in training. And I wonder if, I've said this a couple of times now, I wonder if the options might be that he's in the squad or he's sold. You wonder the benefits of another loan. You said before he's just turned 21. I think it was his birthday when he flew out to, his birthday on Tuesday, I think, when they flew out to Oslo. And we've just seen how ruthless Ten Hag is being with youngsters, really. Obviously, especially youngsters around that 20-21 age where, if they've not made it now, are they going to make it? If Ahmad goes on loan this season, is he going to come back in a year's time and be in the squad? Maybe, but there's no guarantee. His stock's pretty high at the moment after what he did for Sunderland. We saw it with James Garner. I think it's the most obvious example. Garner came back last year, and I think everyone wanted him to be in the squad. Midfield was an area that needed looking at. He'd done really well with Forest. I think everyone thought he was unlucky in pre-season to get injured on the first day of the pre-season tour, but Ten Hag saw a bit of him in training and essentially decided not ready, not of the required standard. His stock was high after what he'd done for Forest, and he was sold to Everton, and it took him a long time to get in the Everton team. So, there's a scenario I think where Ahmad could be similar to that if he doesn't impress Ten Hag enough. Maybe now's the time just to cash in when his value's high. because there's no guarantee after another loan that it'll really change anything, I don't think. So it is going to be interesting to see how it goes this summer. I do think there's like we said, there's clearly a role there for him in the squad, but he's got to earn that role, and it's not just in those friendlies. It's going to be in the training sessions as well that he has to show Ten Hag he's ready for Premier League football and for influencing games, and it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. And I guess some of it will depend on what United can do in the transfer market, and whether it is possible to sign 2 forwards this summer, whether if another wide forward comes in, and that is obviously going to be an issue for Ahmad. If another wide forward doesn't come in, then it increases his chances of staying in the squad and getting some first team action next season.
It would be great if you could put some pressure on Anthony, because he doesn't really have that much competition on that side, does he? I mean, Sancho occasionally plays across there, but he's looking a bit positionless at the moment. He's a bit lost in which position's best for him. His best form's been on the left, so he's another conundrum. Hopefully his form picks up in the new season. We'll move on to some transfer news anyway, Samuel. Obviously, big news this week is United are edging closer to a deal for Andre Onana, Inter Milan goalkeeper. Obviously fantastic ball-playing goalkeeper. I missed David De Gea leaving the club because I was on the beach, but could you tell us a bit more about that deal and where we're sitting at the moment?
Do I have to? Do I really have to?
Samuel's going to say, repeat back to me. Yep, they're inching closer. That's about it. Let's move on.
It's what's the next step from inching closer? Closing in. It's probably it's between inching closer and closing in. Then we could do set 2, and then it could be sign Andre Onana. It's. Again, we have to cover these bloody things in minute detail, and the slightest update, it's lapped up by supporters, it seems. So it doesn't feel like a great deal has changed from Monday when I said something would have to go drastically wrong for Onana not to be a United goalkeeper next season. But if it helps anyone, if it makes them happier, what I was told this morning was that it's close, but the fee is still to be decided by the clubs. So, I mean, some people might say, well, that's not close necessarily, and I'd say that they've got a bit of a point with that. But I think there's a decent chance that he'll at least be able to be involved in the pre-season tour of the States the way things are going. I mean, United have got to be aiming for that as well. And Ten Hag did say in midweek in Oslo, he again stressed what every manager feels. You want new players in for pre-season so that they can familiarise themselves with the patterns of play, and with Onana it's a crucial role as far as defending is concerned, as far as attacking is concerned. We all know from our five-a-side appearances that you build from the back. If an attack breaks down, you go back, and you need to have someone dependable with the ball at their feet, and Onana's going to be extremely vital to the way United play in the forthcoming season. They're still a fair way from mastering the style that Ten Hag wants. One of the reasons last season was because of the goalkeeper. We were discussing earlier that as damaging as the FA Cup final, the Sevilla game, and the West Ham defeat were for De Gea, probably more damaging was his performance against Real Betis when United won 4-1, because he's kicking that night. There's a video of it, and I'm not wishing ill on him at all, but you can't help but laugh at some of the kicks. It is pretty laughable to see his thought process when the ball is at his feet, and it's easy to laugh now because he's no longer at United. And we said earlier at the start of the week what a great goalkeeper he was for the club, and he absolutely was. But he's kicking that night, I forgot just how abysmal it was, and they won't get that with Onana. They might get the odd mistake from Onana where he tries to play an audacious pass and he gets caught out, but as Brendan Rodgers might say, trust the process. There was that time in the rather amusing Being Liverpool documentary when Martin Skrtel played a back pass that was intercepted, and I think it was Aguero who equalised in it might have been Rodgers' first game in charge at Anfield, and he's in the dressing room afterwards saying, you don't blame this man, you don't blame Martin Skrtel. That's my Brendan Rodgers impression anyway. And so there might be an element of that, but coming back to your point, I've tried to give this a long answer rather than just last in 30 seconds. But I'd be surprised the way it's going if Onana is not playing for Man United next season.
Samuel, I'm delighted with that answer. You got increasingly enthusiastic as it went on. You started off, you're like, I'm not having any of this. And then there's a smile on your face by the end. That's what it's all about.
I've learned from the Rashford contract question, which we might end up addressing in the forthcoming weeks.
Tyrone, look, as Samuel said, Onana is a gifted ball-playing goalkeeper. I mean, you were actually in Turkey, obviously, covering Manchester City in the Champions League final, and it was just a bit of a spectacle, wasn't it, really? It was a masterclass in passing. He just steps out into midfield. He looks so comfortable. The press is coming up to him. He just doesn't really flinch, does he? And some of the passes he was playing were quite audacious, actually. You think, how has he picked that one out? And he's funneling the ball into midfield. The players are swiveling, turning out, and it really gives you breathing space in midfield and allows you to build up, doesn't it? So it's going to be a really exciting signing. He's only 27 years old, so he's coming into his prime years now.
Yeah, he is. He's prime years as a goalkeeper. 27 is certainly starting.
He's a spring chicken, isn't he?
Yeah, I'd argue 39 is still prime years for goalkeepers as well.
Wonder why that is.
Yeah, I think. He's clearly a much better fit for United under Ten Hag than De Gea ever was. And Samuel's right. Samuel shared that video with me before of De Gea's kicking against Betis, and it was remarkable, really. And the most, I said to Samuel, the most eye-catching thing I thought was that you can see how much confidence he loses in his own kicking there. Occasionally the camera pans on him after a mistake and he looks red-faced and almost embarrassed by it. And there's a few instances where there's very easy short passes onto defenders and he just boots it long. It's like during that game, he just lost all confidence in his kicking and his ability to just pass it short. And at least one of those kicking errors should have cost United a goal. And it's why we talk about the FA Cup final. I think it is that Betis game, probably more than anything, that made Ten Hag think this is going to be an issue. And I think it was after that game that Ten Hag used the phrase, I cannot ignore it, about De Gea's kicking. And it was at the point he was still praising him and defending him and saying what a good all-round goalkeeper he was. But, I think that was the night it was pretty clear there was a problem. And it was a pretty horrible night weather-wise, I think. But, it can't really be an excuse when...
It's the highest earning. Well, he was the highest earning goalkeeper in the world, Tyrone. Can't not turn up when it rains.
When I let one in through my legs against the US media team in New York next week, I might say it's a pretty horrible weather, lads.
This is why I'd pass it on to Ty. We've got another media match, a shorter one next week, and he's available for that one, and he'll be taking his gloves. But I don't think he can, even if he tried to be as bad with his feet as De Gea was that night. I don't think Ty could be. It was pretty extraordinary watching it back.
So when you're packing for your case, Tyrone, when you for the US tour, your wife's going to go, don't forget the goalkeeper gloves.
Don't forget the goalie gloves, mate. Take it everywhere just in case. You never know where the next contract's coming from. But no, I think, it's pretty clear that it is going to be a major upgrade. But it's going to be, I said previously, I think it's going to be a stylistic change as well. And one that's going to impact the centre-backs. It's going to impact the midfield. Because it is going to change the way United play. And it's going to have a knock-on effect. The defenders are going to have to get used to Onana taking some almighty risks, and I think that's why getting him signed and getting him on tour and giving defenders a chance to understand what he does with his feet and where they need to be is going to be beneficial. So if they can get it done early next week, then I think there's clear advantages to that.
It'd be great to have a goalkeeper, obviously, for the start of the tour, Samuel. But I mean, the elephant in the room, this team needs a goal scorer, doesn't it? We were saying all that throughout last season. Really couldn't score. The attack just didn't really fire in a lot of games. And obviously you're in talks for Rasmus Holjund at the moment. I guess if they brought him in, obviously with Mason Mount and Andre Onana, that's not really enough, is it? It doesn't feel like enough. And how would you rate that? If that was to be their business this summer, what would you say about that? And where would you predict United would finish next season?
Well, I think they will make the odd addition to the squad depending on outgoings. If they do get those three, well, they've obviously filled one position. They're going to get a keeper, and it looks like with Onana, and they absolutely need a striker. But watching the game in the week, I mean, Martinez is back. He played one progressive pass. Manu did. Mount did. You've got these gifted players from deep who can pick a pass. When they look up, they saw Jadon Sancho, and unfortunately for those who didn't watch it, they won't be surprised to know that, or to be informed that Sancho was Sancho, and okay, he was played out of position, but Ten Hag can get a tune out of him in his best position last season, and there was one good turn, and that one good turn would have probably been shotgunned over the internet by Sancho's acolytes, and you could be forgiven thinking, oh, he must have played really well because he did a nice turn in a 2-second clip, but he just looked forlorn, and Mejbri actually fashioned a pretty decent chance for him when he won the ball, and he miscontrolled it. He fumbled his lines, and unfortunately you can't count on Sancho either as a winger, never mind as a striker. And even if Anthony Marshall was fit, if Mason Mount, Lissandro Martinez, Kobbie Mainoo, these players, Onana, they don't want to look up and see Marshall as the player to play the ball to, and that's the problem for United. They've got, there's a danger if they don't get that sorted, they could become a deluxe version of Van Gaal's team, in that they're excellent at keeping the ball. They actually play proactive passes. There's a bit more urgency about them, but they still struggle for goals. Because the way they played last season, goals were hard to come by, but they often found a way to get the win. That approach is unsustainable into a second season, especially when other teams are reinforcing and are likely not to have as poor seasons as they did last season. I've maintained all along the difference between United having as good a season as last season, or a better season, or worse season, it will come down to having a dependable goal scorer, and that might not necessarily be Holjund. And time will tell over the next 6 or 7 weeks. Thankfully, the transfer window closes in I think it's 7 weeks today. It might be. It's on a Friday, so that time will go very, very quickly. I think it was only 6 weeks ago that it was the FA Cup final, so that's how quickly that time can go. And there's a hell of a lot of business for United to do, incomings and outgoings, to get the squad into a state where Ten Hag will be happy with it and supporters will be happy with it. But already you just sense that this season coming up, ordinarily if you finish third, you just think, well, challenge for the title next season. I do think that is too premature. Even if United do end the window with having a very good transfer window, and they get a good striker in Onana, I think is a very progressive move. It's definitely an upgrade on De Gea as well. But this might have to be a season of consolidation where you aim for a trophy. You always want to win a trophy, ideally a more treasured trophy than the League Cup. But going for the title, it feels like they're still a way off that, because although they might, and they probably should for that Wolves game, have an 11 that Ten Hag is completely content with, supporters might get a reality check when they look at the bench, because there could still be a fair amount of deadwood lingering, and if they're not on the bench, the deadwood might be lingering in the physio's room at Carrington.
Tyrone, they need to shift that deadwood. I mean, we say that all the time, but it's quite important, more than ever really this summer, when you look at the budget they're working with, between 100 and 120 million. Let's say obviously Mount was 55, and Nana was probably going to cost around the same, probably in excess of 40 to 50 million. That's 100. Then if they're saying a striker, there's not going to be much left in the transfer kitty, is there? And you look at the players, the sellable assets that they've got Dean Henderson. He's probably the most sellable asset in that team. Let's say he goes to Nottingham Forest. Fred as well. Interest from Saudi Arabia and maybe in Alex Telles. But they really need to shift those players, don't they? Because it's going to be really important to offset any incomings.
They do, yeah. But it's not easy. I think the key word there was they need to sell the deadwood. But if you ever tried selling deadwood, it's not. There's not much of a market for it, I don't think. People prefer live wood. So It's not easy to do, and Eric Bailly and Alex Telles haven't really got many suitors. My attempts to drum up £20 million for Alex Telles a couple of years ago have fallen by the wayside pretty dramatically. You're right. There's not many sellable assets. Henderson and probably McTominay are the most obvious ones. I think for both you're going to need replacements. I think you might be able to make a small profit and maybe an FFP profit, but it's not going to be easy to do. So it is difficult. They do need Saudi Arabia to come calling for Telles and Bailly and a few of these players, but they seem to be the one big six club at the moment that's somehow not attracting any Saudi interest in their deadwood or even their good players, to be honest, because there's a lot of Saudi interest in pretty good players around. So yeah, they could do with sales and they could do with selling players, but it's not easy to. I made the point the other day that the only reason United would sell a player really is if they were really pushing to go and contract situations, or they've not cut it at the club. And the reality is, for players like Van der Beek, Tellez, Bailly, even Maguire, they've not cut it at the club. So there's not going to be a huge market for players who have failed in their most recent employment. So it's not easy, but they certainly do need to improve that budget. And I think if they sold no one and had a budget of 100 and 120 million, then it's clear they're not going to sign a striker, because they're going to be pretty much done with Onana and Mount. So they've got to find a way to sell players, and I think they will do as the window progresses. But it does add to the pressures of the entire transfer window, really.
If I remember correctly, can we blame our former colleague Marcus Banks on the Alex Tellez deal? Didn't he write an opinion piece really, really early doors?
Yeah, he did, yeah.
After that, the reports in Portugal picked up, and then all of a sudden Alex Tellez landed at Manchester Airport. So we'll blame Marcus Banks on that one, I think.
That's probably happened more often than we think with other clubs as well. I mean, there was the infamous that parody account. What was it? 11 years ago, Duncan Jenkins, and the very what was his name at Liverpool? The director of comms who lasted about 5 minutes.
Jen Chang.
Yes, and he wanted to meet with the guy behind the Twitter account, because he claimed that it was costing them more money to sign Fabio Borini or something like that. Pretty just pretty weird and wacky, but these things have happened. And yeah, with Tellez, I mean,
there were dark days if you were a Liverpool fan, but brilliant days as a United fan. Looking across and looking at that.
Yes, yeah. This was 2012. Yeah, it was the start of the Brendan Rodgers era as well. And another reference from Brendan Rodgers on this podcast. But with Tellez is very much deemed. I mean, he can be sold without having to be replaced, because United have got 4 other left backs to choose from. Even though they look a little bit lighter at centre half with a couple of players being released there. Again, they don't need a replacement for him. He is scorched earth, really. I mean, look, I forgot how few games he played in that 2021-22 season. It was something like, and he was actually fit for the majority of it as well, which is unlike Eric Bailly. But he hardly had a kick that season. It was barely breaking double figures for appearances, and it was earlier that year that he was given a new contract, and that is one of the biggest issues United have with shifting players. They have given out stupidly long contracts to players who occasionally play pretty stupidly as well.
That one was really, really baffling, to be fair. And the reason Samuel's discussing Brendan Rodgers so much is he's actually a massive, massive Celtic fan. He's got a Celtic shirt hanging up behind him. If you're not watching on YouTube,
it's highly untrue, obviously. It's a retro film poster. I did have a Celtic shirt once when I was a kid. I'll admit to that, yeah.
Well, I've got Scottish family in there. They're actually split between Celtic and Rangers, so it's an interesting dynamic, as you can imagine.
Montagues and Capulets there,
north of the border. Crikey. It certainly is. We'll leave that there for part 2. We'll be back in a moment for part 3. We'll just wrap this podcast up then, gents. The producer, our great producer Seb, suggested it might be a good idea to discuss Samuel's player insight piece, where, Samuel, you walked through your experiences with players over the years, and particularly your experiences with Phil Jones. And Tyrone, I'll also ask about your experiences, because I think the pack had a nice conversation with De Gea last summer, didn't they, in pre-season, which was quite interesting. But Samuel, to begin with, you just want to talk through that piece, really, because I will say it's an interesting piece, but I will admit I only skimmed through it before I went on the podcast, because I have been off. Is that offensive?
My silence speaks volumes there, Stephen. Well, if you want to learn anything in this industry, you've got to put the mileage in.
Even on holiday or on the pool.
Yeah. I know. In fairness to you, I definitely also try to zone out when I'm off on holiday and not working. The thing with Phil Jones, that these 2 issues with him were not they weren't conducted by him in person, which was probably also telling. I spoke to him in a mix zone once when he was playing really well for United. It was midway through Mourinho's first season. It was West Brom away. They just won 2-0. He'd played well. When he was having a very good, he was involved in a very good partnership briefly with Marcus Rojo. I mean, it's strange, but it was true. Those two were looking like pretty good United centre-backs for a while. And I think I said to him in the mix zone, it's like, it looks like you're one of Mourinho's leaders out there. And the reply was so monosyllabic, I didn't even transcribe it. It certainly didn't make its way into copy for the Monday paper. Ibrahimovic stops in the mix zone as well, and it was all on Ibrahimovic because he'd scored a couple of goals. And then so I thought, well, that was strange, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. But then 5 or 6 months later, I thought, oh, well, that's clearly why he gave me short shrift, because I went to attend United away at Arsenal towards the end of the season. United were going for the Europa League, so it was one of those games where Mourinho just tossed it off because the Premier League, he knew they weren't going to get into top four. They had an injury crisis. I think they had like Dimitri Mitchell, Matthew Olasunde in the squad that day. It was Scott McTominay's debut. Axel Tuanzebe made his full debut as well. So as far as Arsenal United games go, this was not one to remember. And Jones did not play well, and there'd been an incident in the week where this is one for UK politics enthusiasts. But Diane Abbott, the Labour MP, gave this interview on radio where she got her calculations spectacularly wrong. I'm dreadful at maths, but even I thought it was bad, and it became this. It cut through, as they say in politics. It was something that was talked about a lot, and I said, unfortunately, Miss Abbott was she was filmed during this interview as well. The interview was filmed, but you couldn't see her, and it probably made it worse. And even though I couldn't see her, you sensed what she looked like. And I wrote that Jones looked as startled as Diane Abbott. It's probably not a line I'd write now for a myriad of reasons. Least of all, her letter to the Observer earlier this year, and the fact that she's been suspended by the Labour Party. But I think it was the day after or 2 days after, my editor got a call from the United press officer complaining about this and saying that I wouldn't get any access on the pre-season tour. Once the United director of comms got wind of this, he nipped that in the bud. So that was my first issue with Phil Jones. And all I could think was that he probably, from that mix zone where he gave me short shrift, I covered his comeback, the under-21s, the previous season, towards the end of Van Gaal's reign. And they were games at Old Trafford, so the exposure was pretty decent. And, I mean, it's still the case now. The Evening News covers those games in greater depth than anyone, including the actual United website. And, of course, you have to do talking points, or you do something that's opinionated, because that's what football journalism is about, by and large, or certainly a big section of it is. And Jones was poor in those games, and at the time, Tuanzebe and Rashawn Williams were playing them. They were playing well, and Jones just did not look like a senior professional. And there was a game against Chelsea where he got nutmegged by a kid called Casey Palmer. And the kid actually even uploaded it onto his Instagram, the video of it. So, the exposure was decent enough. And then you've got some Chelsea Academy player essentially ridiculing Phil Jones on Instagram. But I wasn't referring to that in my piece, but I was just saying how poor he was. And he didn't actually play again that season for the first team after January the 2nd, I think it might have been. And I suspect because I was giving prominence to his dreadfulness in the under-21s that he had to be in his bonnet over that. So that was that. I'll try and be a bit more succinct with the other issue, which was when Varane signed. Varane asked for the number 4. That was the number he wanted. Jones said no. I reported it. On the evening that United had just thrashed Leeds 5-1, I had a press officer on at me saying, Phil's unhappy about this, he denies it. I said, well, I stand by the story. I even checked in again with the contact about it, and he said, yeah, that was absolutely the case. So there's back and forth. Then the main press officer got involved, and just said what I'd already been told by the other press officer. I said what I had already said, and she said, that's fine, just letting you know he's not happy with it. Even she couldn't be bothered to get involved with it because it was a Saturday night. You want to unwind. United have just won 5-1 as well. You've got a day off the next day, enjoy yourself. So then come the Zoom call the next week against for the pre-match Southampton, I'm waiting. I've got my hand raised on the Zoom function. Everyone's on mute. You're unmuted when it's your turn to ask a question. And I was deliberately ignored by the press officer who had his finger on the button because I'd upset Phil Jones, effectively. So that just gives you an idea of how thin-skinned footballers can be. Now, Jones gave a very really interesting interview to Jonathan Northcroft a couple of years ago where he talked about some lowlife abusing him while he was walking his 2 little girls in the park, and that's absolutely deplorable. I'd never condone that, and I don't think I should have to say it, but I've never abused a footballer in person or via a keyboard. Unfortunately it's fans, it's internet fans that stoop to that low, and occasionally it's the odd passerby in the street who will stoop to an even lower low. So I get that Phil Jones has had a lot of grief as a footballer, and he's had a lot of stick as well, but also he was far too thin-skinned to ever be a success at Man United, and also unfortunately he had injury issues which compromised him as well. But he wouldn't have lasted in Ferguson's days if he was pouring through what everyone was writing about him, and what I wrote about him compared to what other people wrote about him was probably quite tame. I mean, as I told another United player last season during a pretty frank exchange with him, I've praised and criticised literally every player in the squad. I think if you've done that, then and people are saying, oh, you've always got it in for him. No, he's always got it in for him. And if the lines are that blurred with some of these online fans, then you're probably doing the right thing if you're getting it from both sides. So that was I deliberately waited for Phil Jones to no longer be a Man United player to write that piece, because at that point he couldn't even actually complain to anyone about it.
It's great insight though, and obviously for fans that maybe don't know what goes on behind the scenes as journalists or aspects of the job, it's really valuable. I mean, if you go across, I've just found the piece there, gagged on Zoom and late night emails dealing with Manchester United players. That's the headline on the MEN site if you want to go read it in written form. And Samuel, I might actually go read it after. What do you think of that? I might leave you a comment, an abusive comment actually. Depends how
it could be bedtime reading. Could help you get off to sleep if it's that long. I
think Samuel's I think Tyrone's De Gea story is going to be more bedtime reading because that's a bit more topical. Tyrone, obviously last summer you guys, the pack, were out in Australia and Thailand on pre-season tour, and you had the opportunity to sit down with De Gea, didn't you? I think it was in a hotel room, and a few weeks later was at Brentford, if my memory serves correct, that he made that mistake and he requested to talk to local media. So
Tyrone Marshall. He wanted to talk to Tyrone Marshall.
Was it just Tyrone Marshall? There you go.
He wanted to speak to the Manchester reporter, to which it only happened to me. But I think he was relieved to see a fellow goalkeeper there who would understand.
do you think he'd been watching from the stands in the media game?
Yeah, I think when he saw it was me, he thought he's going to get it, and then I said, "No, David, I've never made a mistake like that in all my career." No, the one in Perth was it was very, very humorous, to be fair. Looking back, Samuel was there as well, and we were doing a sit down with De Gea. There was 8 or 10 of us in the room, and walked into basically a hotel, just someone's hotel bedroom, where United was staying. There was it's one of these. Obviously, it was a 5-star hotel, and it had this electronic TV sign, and it did actually have the name of the person's room, didn't it? Well, I can't remember who it was.
Mr. Coombs? I think it was Mr. Coombs, wasn't it?
Mr. Coombs, maybe? Could have been something like that. Your memery's phonamenal for this sort of stuff, so I thought I definitely wrote it down.
Borderline weird as memory. You could just pull that out, yeah.
No, I don't remember. Honestly, I had to go into our system and see what was because I was pretty sure I'd written the name of the name in the feature on it, and I did. So that's why I went back to. Yeah. But I think it was Coombs.
Yeah, it was very strange. Yeah, and we were all basically just draped across. I mean, there wasn't enough room in the hotel room for us anyway. So yeah, several of us were. Well, me and a couple of others at least were lay on this bed while we interviewed David De Gea. Someone actually took a photo which Samuel shared with the group the other day and said it was De Gea's last big interaction, basically, with the people that cover United on a daily basis, and a memorable one, it'd be fair to say. He also said in that interview to Samuel's question, I think, that he did want to spend the rest of his career at United, but that obviously ended very badly for him.
He said if they let me as well, didn't he?
If they let me, yeah, and they have not let him.
Was he in good form then, Ty? What was he like to actually deal with there? Because
he was good, actually.
Yeah.
He got a lot better. Obviously, he was well before my time, but from what people say, he was a very reluctant talker in the early days. But I think the last 2 years at least, he's got a lot better. He was a much more visible presence, certainly on TV interviews last season, and in the COVID season. Last year, he did a lot of a lot of interviews when United had played poorly, which they did most weeks last season, and it did feel like he'd kind of stepped up into that role of talking a lot more. I think there was a time when he never stopped in the mix zone, and although last year it was mostly TV stuff, this year he was better as well. And I did him at Brentford. I think he stopped at an Old Trafford game once, and then did him for the Sunday papers at Crystal Palace when they actually just conceded in the 90th minute, and still brought him to us. And he was really good that night. So yeah, I thought he got better as a talker and being more open and kind of embracing that status as one of the elder statesmen in the squad as he went on, and he was a reasonably good talker. And I think he was in pretty good form back in that hotel room. Yeah, I think there was some decent stuff from that.
So what needs to happen now is obviously he's left the club. The pack need to organise getting that photo blown up, framed, and sent to him and saying, "Bon voyage, David.
Thanks for the memories."
Thanks for the memories. Exactly. Thanks for the memories. We'll leave it there then, gents. Thank you very much, Samuel.
Thank you, Steven.
And thank you, Tyrone.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to all the listeners as usual. Have a fantastic weekend. And we'll be back on Monday afternoon. Take care.